On Saturday, during the Prime Minister's response to Mr. Trump's tariffs, he was specifically asked if he would recall Parliament to pass a bill to help Canadian workers impacted by tariffs.
Minister, will you recall Parliament to pass a bill to help Canadian workers and end prorogation?
As you can see from our strong response package, as we spoke about with premiers this afternoon and have for many weeks, we have the tools to be able to support Canadians through this challenging time as it stands. This is a moment for Canadians to pull together, including Canadians of all different political parties. This is a moment where we need to set aside our differences and focus on delivering for Canadians, standing up for Canadians, and protecting the most successful political, military, economic, and security partnership the world has ever seen. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We have the tools to do it as a government right now, and we will keep doing it alongside our premiers and our partners.
And while the Prime Minister tried to reassure Canadians that Ottawa has the tools it needs to respond, there were growing questions, both about what can actually be done without Parliament sitting and the differing views from the Liberal leadership candidates, with the winner of the race becoming Prime Minister at the end of March. I'm now joined by Liberal strategist Andrew Perez to unpack this further. Andrew, thank you for being with us.
Great to be on the show.
Now, the Prime Minister said in that video that he has the tools needed to respond. But many have pointed out that without Parliament sitting, Ottawa can't pass any legislation in response to Mr. Trump. Would you say that we're at a disadvantage right now because of Parliament being prorogued?
Well, Theresa, I would broadly agree with the Prime Minister. Look, I think, ideally Parliament would be sitting and there could be an emergency debate on the tariff threat, and all party leaders would speak and there would be a take note debate. However, as Mr. Trudeau noted, the really the response we've seen has been from the executive level of government. So the cabinet, the Prime Minister's office, and you've also seen several premiers from across Canada announce plans to respond to these tariffs. So while it would be ideal to have Parliament sitting during what was going to be a national crisis, you've seen what the Trudeau government did put forward last weekend, which was a dollar for dollar retaliatory tariff on starting with $30 billion of goods and expanding to $125 billion within 21 days. Of course, Mr. Trump backed off on the tariff threat at the 11th hour on Monday, and so we won't be plunged into a trade war. But again, I think that Mr. Trudeau and the Liberal government has shown leadership. The premiers have shown leadership. They've adopted a Team Canada approach, and that has I think met the moment.
Now, with tariffs aside, there are a lot of eyes right now on the front runners in the Liberal leadership race, and that's Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney. Starting with Miss Freeland, we know that Donald Trump is not really a fan of hers, and she's branded her campaign very much in opposition to Mr. Trump. If she wins the leadership race, does that help or hurt Canadians as we try to end this trade war?
Well, I think it's a double-edged sword, Theresa. Miss Freeland's greatest strength is her experience. She's been at the cabinet table for nearly a decade. She's held senior roles like Minister of International Trade, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Finance Deputy Prime Minister. In fact, during the first Trump administration, when Miss Freeland was the lead negotiator when we saw the Canada, U.S., Mexico free trade agreement renegotiated, and she delivered a win for Canada. We were able to eventually avert steel and aluminum tariffs that Trump had implemented during his first term in power. And so she brings a great deal of experience dealing with the Trump administration. She has those relationships. On the other hand, it is true that the relationship between her and Mr. Trump is very strained. She points out that she gets under his skin. I would say that she has proven to be a very effective negotiator in the past. And in times of economic crisis like we live in, we need a tough negotiator like Miss Freeland. And so I think that it's a double-edged sword, and I wouldn't ignore the fact that she's a tough negotiator and she can really fight for Canadian jobs and Canadian interests.
Now, I do want to talk about Miss Freeland's experience. So she obviously does have a lot of experience with Parliament, but you can argue that Kamala Harris also had that experience. The problem that I'm seeing between the two is that they're both building a campaign around how could we take Trump down. And I'm wondering if that in the future could hurt Miss Freeland's chance of actually winning the leadership.
Well, I think that Miss Freeland is the underdog in this leadership race. I think Mr. Carney, in the first 2 to 3 weeks of this race, it's clear that he's the early front runner. This race is his to lose. But having said that, I think what the last 48 hours showed, if anything, is that the Trump administration backed down. They saw Trump and his cabinet, Commerce Secretary, they saw Canada fight back immediately over the weekend. They saw the dollar for dollar retaliatory tariff that Trudeau announced on Saturday evening. And I believe that Republican governors and senior Republican legislators were calling up Mr. Trump and his seniors advisors to tell them that Canada meant business, and that a retaliation on Canada's part would hurt the American economy and hurt American jobs as well. And I do believe that's what led Mr. Trump to finally back off and to at least say that we would have another month before revisiting the potential for these punitive tariffs. And so I think talking tough, like Miss Freeland has done, and proposing, Miss Freeland has been very detailed in her policy proposals as into how she would confront this crisis vis-a-vis the Trump administration. And so I think that has been a useful approach to take. Mr. Carney hasn't provided as much detail as to how he would go toe-to-toe with the Trump administration from a policy vantage point.
So I do want to talk about Mark Carney's response because, as you just mentioned, he hasn't been quite as specific. Could you explain what he said in response to the tariffs, and what do you make of his response?
So I think Mr. Carney has echoed broadly what Ms. Freeland has said on the tariffs. He said that Canada needs to be tough, that we need to stand up to the bully that is Donald Trump, that we need to fight back with a dollar for dollar retaliatory tariff. He hasn't produced the detailed pledges that Ms. Freeland has, but he's also spoken to the need to protect Canadian jobs and growth. He's spoken to the need to diversify our trading relationships. We have relied heavily on our US partners for decades now. I think if there's any silver lining coming out of this potential tariff war, trade war, it's that we need to go back to the drawing board and look at our relationships and look at how we can further diversify our trading relationship with other countries, including the European Union. And Mr. Carney has spoken to that. He's also spoken to, financial support that he would provide to businesses, and what we would do to ensure that businesses stay afloat during what would probably be the biggest economic crisis that this country has faced since the Great Depression.
Now, there are three other candidates in the race as well, and I want to discuss their shot at winning here. So, Karina Gold launched her campaign with a plan to raise corporate taxes while cutting the GST. What do you make of that proposal, and does she have a path to victory here?
Miss Gould is an interesting candidate. I think she does not have a path to victory in this race. She is 37 years old. She's held several cabinet roles in this government, most recently as government House leader. But she is a millennial, a Jewish woman, and I think she shows great promise in terms of rebuilding the Liberal Party's relationship with the millennial and the Generation Z demographics. We know, public opinion polling shows that the Conservatives are way ahead among the younger demographic in this country as a result of the housing affordability crisis and the affordability crisis writ large. And so I think Miss Gould is able to relate to the younger demographic. She's a young mother. She's a Jewish woman. I think the Liberal Party also needs to rebuild its relationship with the Jewish community that has been strained in the aftermath of October 7th, 2023. With regards to this proposal, I don't necessarily agree with the proposal that she's put forward, but again, she's trying to stake out her own ground, her own policy ground in this leadership race. And I know that a lot of Liberals are speaking about Miss Gould. They're excited about her candidacy, and they believe that she represents the future of the Liberal Party.
Now, someone that is definitely trying to reach out to the younger generation is Ruby Dalla. She's generated some buzz on social media, and specifically, it's been her comments about deporting illegal immigrants. Now, how does she stack up here in terms of actually appealing to Liberal Party members who usually are pretty opposed to claims like this?
Yeah, I've watched what Miss Dalla has put out on social media, I think she really misses the mark. I think she is looking for clickbait. I also, to your point, question whether these proposals that she's put forward and also, comparing herself to Donald Trump, the Canadian version of Donald Trump, I really don't think that this messaging meets the moment. I don't think it resonates with rank and file grassroots liberals from across the country. Your viewers, Theresa, have to understand that this leadership race, only Liberal Party members will be able to vote. So Miss Dalla is really speaking to Liberal Party members, partisans, people that are genuine liberals from coast to coast to coast, not the public at large. And I don't think that the rhetoric that
Andrew,
she's
sorry, I
put.
do just have to interrupt you. We've ran out of time, but thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, appreciate it.